The night shift at Riverside General Hospital had just begun when the new nurse quietly walked through the double doors of the intensive care unit. The hallway lights were soft and pale, reflecting off the polished floors. Machines hummed gently in the background, and distant voices from the emergency department echoed down the corridor. It was the kind of place where every second mattered, and every decision could change a life. The new nurse carried a small bag and a folder of papers. Her name tag read Alyssa Carter, but most of the staff had only heard about her earlier that day. The hospital had recently hired several nurses because the ICU had been short-staffed for months. Still, people always paid special attention when someone new arrived for the night shift. Alyssa did not try to attract attention. She walked calmly to the nurse station, greeted the charge nurse politely, and handed over her paperwork. Her voice was soft but clear. "Good evening. I'm here for my first shift." The charge nurse looked up briefly, checked the documents, and nodded. "All right, you'll start in bed 4 and 5 tonight. It can get busy here, so stay close." "I will," Alyssa replied with a small smile. She tied her hair back neatly, washed her hands carefully, and stepped into the ICU area as if she had worked there for years. But a few of the other nurses had already noticed something about her. She was unusually calm. Many new nurses were nervous on their first shift. They asked lots of questions, checked things twice, and sometimes looked overwhelmed by the constant sounds of monitors and alarms. Alyssa, however, moved quietly and confidently. She checked the patient charts, studied the monitors, and adjusted equipment without hesitation. 2 nurses standing near the medication counter watched her. "Is that the new one?" one whispered. "I think so," the other replied quietly. "She seems very relaxed for someone on their first night." They continued watching for a moment. Alyssa stepped into the first patient room. The man inside was recovering from a heart procedure. His breathing was slow but steady, and several machines were tracking his condition. Alyssa checked the 4 line, adjusted the monitor settings slightly, and gently woke the patient. "Hello, sir," she said kindly. "I'm your nurse tonight. If you need anything, just press the call button." The man nodded weakly. She then wrote a quick note on the chart and stepped back into the hallway. The second patient was a woman who had been admitted after a serious infection. Her condition was still unstable. Alyssa carefully checked every reading on the machines, then listened to the patient's breathing through a stethoscope. One of the senior nurses walked past the room and noticed how focused Alyssa looked. "First night?" the senior nurse asked. "Yes," Alyssa answered politely. "You seem comfortable already." "I've worked in busy places before," Alyssa said simply. The senior nurse gave a small shrug and continued walking. But the truth was, something about the new nurse felt unusual. She did not rush. She did not panic when alarms beeped suddenly. Instead, she reacted quickly and calmly every time. About an hour into the shift, a loud call came from the emergency department downstairs. "Trauma patient arriving." That message always changed the atmosphere in the hospital. Nurses moved faster. Doctors prepared equipment. The elevators began opening and closing more frequently. Even though Alyssa worked in the ICU, trauma cases often moved to the emergency room first before coming upstairs. A few minutes later, one of the ER nurses rushed into the ICU hallway. "We may be bringing someone up soon," she said quickly. "Car accident victim. Possible internal injuries." The charge nurse nodded. "Prepare bed 2. Several nurses immediately began organizing equipment. Alyssa quietly stepped closer. "Do you need help setting up?" she asked. One nurse handed her a set of supplies without thinking much about it. "Sure, connect the fluids and check the monitor." Within seconds, Alyssa had already done it. Her hands moved quickly but carefully. She double-checked the oxygen setup and arranged the emergency medications neatly on the tray. The nurse who gave her the supplies blinked in surprise. "Wow, that was fast." Alyssa simply nodded. Soon the elevator doors opened and a stretcher rolled out. Doctors surrounded the injured patient while giving instructions. Blood pressure dropping. Prepare another line. Monitor breathing. The room became loud and tense. Alyssa stood near the wall at first, observing quietly. She watched the doctors, the monitors, and the movement of the nurses. Her eyes seemed to notice every detail. Then suddenly a monitor alarm began to beep faster. His oxygen levels are falling, someone said. Alyssa stepped forward without hesitation. The mask seal isn't tight, she said calmly. She adjusted it quickly and checked the reading again. The numbers on the monitor slowly improved. One of the doctors glanced at her. Good catch. Alyssa simply stepped back again and continued observing. The patient was stabilized and eventually moved into the ICU for further care. After everything settled down, the nurses gathered again near the station. That was intense. One of them sighed. Typical Friday night. Another said. The conversation soon turned back to the new nurse. She stayed pretty calm, someone whispered. Yeah, almost too calm. Another nurse laughed quietly. Maybe she just hides her nerves well. Meanwhile, Alyssa sat at the desk updating patient charts. She worked quietly, her face focused but peaceful. The charge nurse approached her. How are you holding up? She asked. I'm doing fine, Alyssa replied. Most new nurses looked terrified their first night. Alyssa smiled slightly. I've seen busy nights before. The charge nurse studied her for a moment, then nodded and walked away. Hours passed as the hospital continued its usual rhythm. Machines beeped softly. Nurses checked patients. Doctors came and went. Around midnight, the ICU lights were dimmed slightly to help patients rest. The hallway became quieter. Alyssa walked slowly between the rooms, checking each patient carefully. She adjusted blankets, checked 4 lines, and wrote notes on the charts. Every movement was smooth and confident. At one point, a patient suddenly began breathing heavily. A nurse quickly called out, "Something's wrong in room 3. Before anyone else reached the door, Alyssa was already there. She looked at the monitor for only a second. His pressure is dropping, she said calmly. She adjusted the flow and repositioned the patient slightly. Call the doctor, she added. Within moments, the situation stabilized. When the doctor arrived, he checked the readings and nodded. Good work catching that early. The nurse who had called for help looked surprised. You noticed that quickly, she told Alyssa. Alyssa simply gave a small nod. Later, during a short break, a few nurses sat together in the staff room drinking coffee. They spoke quietly so the patients would not be disturbed. That new nurse is interesting, one said. Yeah, she barely talks, but she knows what she's doing. Another nurse leaned back in her chair. I asked her earlier where she worked before this, and she just said she worked in a few difficult places. That was it. The room grew quiet for a moment. People often shared stories about their past jobs, especially in hospitals. But Alyssa did not seem interested in talking about herself. Back in the ICU hallway, Alyssa continued her rounds. She paused near a window that looked out toward the hospital parking lot. The night outside was dark and quiet. For a moment, she simply stood there thinking. Then a monitor beeped again, and she immediately returned to work. The night shift still had many hours left, but the staff at Riverside General had already begun to realize something about the quiet new nurse. She did not seek attention. She did not explain her experience, and she never tried to impress anyone. Yet every time something serious happened, she reacted faster than most people in the room. By the time the clock reached 2 in the morning, the whispers about her had already started spreading through the department. Who was that new ICU nurse? No one had the answer yet, and Alyssa Carter seemed perfectly fine, keeping it that way. The next morning in the ICU was quieter than the night had been, but the staff still felt the lingering tension from the previous shift. People moved with careful attention, checking charts, adjusting machines, and quietly discussing patients. Alyssa Carter had returned for her day's shift, still calm, still collected, as if nothing about her first night had been unusual. Yet the nurses who had watched her work couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. Some of the senior nurses whispered as they passed by. Did you notice how calm she was last night? One said softly, glancing toward Alyssa as she checked in 4 line. It was almost unusual. I know, the other replied. She didn't panic once, and she handled everything like she's done it 1,000 times before. Alyssa heard none of it. She focused on her patients, gently speaking to each one, adjusting monitors and making notes. Her quiet presence seemed to put the patients at ease. Even those who were restless or anxious responded to her soft, confident voice. She never raised her tone, never seemed hurried, but always moved with purpose. Throughout the morning, a few smaller incidents tested the staff. A patient's oxygen levels dipped, a monitor alarmed, and another required immediate medication adjustments. Other nurses rushed in, reacting quickly, but Alyssa was already there, calmly handling each situation with precision. She adjusted the oxygen mask, checked the lines, and administered medication exactly when it was needed. Every step she took was smooth and deliberate, as though she had anticipated the problem before it happened. Some of the nurses exchanged uneasy glances. "It's like she's been trained for this," one whispered to another. "Maybe she has," the other said softly. "I've never seen anyone move this calmly under pressure, especially on their first night." Even the doctor started noticing. During a brief pause between rounds, one of the attending physicians, a tall man with graying hair, watched Alyssa from across the room. She adjusted the monitor of a patient recovering from surgery and noticed a slight irregularity in the readings. Without hesitation, she alerted the team, and a quick intervention prevented a potential complication. The doctor shook his head slightly impressed. "She's got sharp instincts," he muttered to a colleague. Alyssa didn't seek praise or recognition. She returned to her work, quietly making sure each patient was stable, each chart up to date. She didn't talk much about herself or her past experience, even when other nurses tried to strike up a conversation during a short break. "Where did you work before here?" one nurse asked casually while sitting in the staff lounge. Alyssa smiled faintly. "I've been in a few busy places," she said simply. The nurse nodded but pressed further, curious about this quiet, capable new team member. "Busy places? Like hospitals? Or something else?" Alyssa only shook her head lightly. "Just places where you learn to stay calm when things get intense." Her answer, simple as it was, didn't satisfy them. They exchanged quiet looks, unsure if she was avoiding the question on purpose or if she simply didn't want to share. Either way, her silence only added to the growing sense of intrigue. Later that morning, a new patient was admitted to the ICU after a severe fall. The team had to act fast. Doctors gave instructions, nurses moved quickly, and alarms began to sound. Alyssa immediately assessed the situation, checking the patient's airway, breathing, and circulation. She noticed a subtle drop in blood pressure that others had not yet seen. "I think we need another 4-line, she said calmly. A nurse glanced at her and hesitated. "Are you sure? It's stable right now." "Not for long," Alyssa replied with quiet confidence. "We should prepare it." Within minutes, the line was in place, and the patient's condition stabilized. The other nurses looked at her with a mix of admiration and confusion. "She just seems to know what to do," one whispered. "It's like she can see what's coming before it happens." During the lunch break, a few staff members gathered to talk about the morning. They spoke in low voices so as not to disturb patients. "I can't stop thinking about her first night," one nurse admitted. "She didn't panic once. Even when the trauma patient came in, she was already on top of everything before anyone else knew what to do." Another nurse nodded. "And now today, she's still like that. I don't get it. Where does this calmness come from?" No one had an answer. Alyssa returned from her rounds quietly, carrying a tray of supplies for a patient who needed medication. She moved carefully, arranging everything neatly, never wasting a moment. She didn't speak unless necessary and didn't engage in gossip. Her actions were precise and purposeful, but her quiet presence made the room feel calm and orderly. In the afternoon, a minor emergency occurred. A patient had a sudden drop in oxygen saturation, and panic began to ripple through the room. Alyssa immediately moved to the bedside, adjusting the mask and monitoring the readings. She instructed another nurse to prepare a backup oxygen supply while she checked the patient's vitals again. The alarm silenced as the patient's levels returned to normal. "Thank you," the patient whispered weakly. I thought I was going to." Alyssa smiled softly. "You're okay now. Just rest." The staff watched, impressed at how calmly she handled the situation. It was not just her technical skill, but her demeanor. She brought a sense of order and reassurance that seemed to ripple through everyone in the room. As the day continued, Whispers about her began to circulate more openly. Some of the nurses were openly discussing her past, trying to figure out who she was and where she had learned to handle situations so well. Yet Alyssa remained quiet, focused on her work, never offering explanations. During rounds, one of the doctors finally asked her directly, "Have you worked in critical care before?" Alyssa nodded once. "Yes, I've had experience in high-pressure environments." The doctor raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. He had seen enough to know that her skills spoke louder than any explanation could. Later, a nurse approached her privately. "I don't mean to pry, but you're unusually calm. Most people would panic in situations like these. What's your secret?" Alyssa paused, thinking carefully before she spoke. "I focus on what I can control," she said simply. "I try to stay present and handle each thing as it comes. That's all." The nurse nodded, sensing that this was all she would say. Alyssa didn't want attention. She didn't want to be recognized or praised. She simply wanted to do her job well. By late afternoon, the ICU had settled into a quieter rhythm. Patients were resting, machines were stable, and doctors were finishing their rounds. Alyssa moved between rooms, checking charts, adjusting monitors, and making sure everything was in order. Yet even in the calm, the staff continued to notice her. They watched how she moved, how she interacted with patients, and how she handled unexpected issues. There was a sense among the team that Alyssa had a background that was far from ordinary. They didn't know the details, but her competence and composure suggested experience in places few people could imagine. As the shift came to an end, the staff began to change over for the evening. The nurses who had worked closely with her during the day exchanged final thoughts. "She's remarkable." One said quietly, "I still can't figure her out. She doesn't talk about herself, but she's clearly been through something intense." "I agree," the other replied. "I feel like we're only seeing a small part of her story." Alyssa packed her bag quietly, preparing to leave for the night. She didn't linger, didn't seek out conversation, and didn't explain anything. She simply walked out with the same calm, measured steps she'd used all day. Her presence lingered in the ICU long after she had left, leaving the staff with a mix of curiosity, respect, and quiet admiration. No one knew exactly what her past held, but it was clear that Alyssa Carter was not just another nurse. She was someone with the skill, experience, and composure that set her apart. And though she remained silent about her history, the way she handled each situation made it clear that her calmness was not an act. It was a result of having faced and overcome challenges that most people could barely imagine. That day in the ICU ended as it had begun, with the machines humming, patients resting, and nurses working efficiently. But behind the quiet routines, Alyssa's presence had left a mark. The staff whispered among themselves, sharing stories about her quick thinking, calm demeanor, and mysterious past. They didn't know the full story yet, but they knew one thing for certain. The quiet new nurse was extraordinary, and the ICU would never be the same with her on the team. The evening shift at Riverside General Hospital brought a new kind of tension to the ICU. The sun had set hours ago, and the fluorescent lights cast a steady glow over the rows of monitors and beds. Outside, the city hummed with life. But inside the ICU, the atmosphere was quiet and focused. Nurses moved between patients, checking charts, adjusting lines, and keeping a constant watch over machines that tracked every heartbeat and breath. Alyssa Carter arrived on time, as always, her expression calm and composed. She greeted the charge nurse with a soft smile and immediately started her rounds. It was her third night in the ICU, and already the staff had begun to rely on her presence. Even if they didn't fully understand it, her quiet confidence had become a stabilizing force in the sometimes chaotic environment. The first few hours were steady. Patients slept, monitors beeped in gentle rhythms, and the staff went about their usual tasks. But by late evening, the unexpected began to unfold. The emergency department radio crackled with urgent voices. Multiple trauma victims inbound, car accident, severe injuries, ETA 5 minutes. The room shifted instantly. The calm, steady hum of the ICU transformed into organized chaos. Doctors moved quickly, calling out instructions. Nurses scrambled to prepare beds and equipment. Yet Alyssa remained calm. Her steps were deliberate, her movements precise. She began checking vital equipment, ensuring that oxygen tanks were full, for lines ready and monitors functioning perfectly. A stretcher wheeled in moments later, carrying a man with broken bones and internal injuries. He was pale, barely conscious, and in obvious distress. The other nurses reacted quickly, some running around with instructions from doctors, but Alyssa immediately went to the patient's side. She assessed his condition in a few quick, careful steps, checking his airway, breathing, and circulation. Every movement was confident and purposeful. "Pressure dropping," a nurse shouted. Alyssa adjusted the floor line and repositioned the patient slightly, giving clear, calm instructions to the team around her. "Give fluids. Check oxygen. Prepare for stabilization." The patient's vitals began to respond. Alyssa's calm authority seemed to anchor the room. Even the doctors, usually the ones giving orders, followed her guidance, trusting her judgment. Within minutes, the patient stabilized enough to continue treatment in the ICU. Other staff members whispered to each other, impressed and slightly confused. "She moves like she's done this hundreds of times," one nurse said. "She has to have some serious experience," another replied. Alyssa did not respond to the whispers. She returned to checking charts, adjusting medications, and ensuring all equipment was ready for any further emergencies. She focused only on the patients and the work at hand, never seeking attention or praise. An hour later, another patient arrived, this time a woman injured in a similar accident. The team was already tense from the first emergency. Some nurses began to show signs of stress, hands shaking, voices rising. But Alyssa maintained her composure. She calmly assessed a new patient, instructed the team efficiently, and made sure everything was in place for quick intervention. Her presence alone seemed to calm the room. During the chaos, a young nurse approached Alyssa quietly. "How do you stay so calm? I feel like I'm about to lose control here." Alyssa looked at her gently. "Focus on what you can do, one step at a time. Panicking doesn't help anyone." The nurse nodded, taking a deep breath and returning to her duties, visibly steadier. As the night progressed, more patients arrived from the accident. Each time, Alyssa moved through the rooms, assessing, instructing, and helping stabilize patients with the same quiet authority. Her efficiency and composure stood out more with every emergency. Other staff began to notice patterns in her work, how she anticipated needs, how she moved before instructions were even given, and how her calm presence seemed to influence everyone around her. By midnight, the ICU was filled with a mix of patients, each requiring careful attention. Alyssa worked tirelessly, checking charts, adjusting monitors, and making sure that every patient received the care they needed. Despite the relentless pace, she never seemed rushed or tired. Her focus remained sharp, her movements deliberate, and her demeanor composed. A doctor approached her during a brief lull. "You're remarkable," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone handle a night like this so smoothly." Alyssa shook her head slightly. "I just focus on what needs to be done," she said softly. The doctor nodded, sensing that there was more to her than she revealed, but recognizing that pressing further was unnecessary. Her work spoke louder than words. Later, a minor emergency occurred when one patient's heart rate suddenly spiked. Other nurses rushed in, unsure of the cause, but Alyssa was already assessing the situation. She checked the patient's readings, adjusted the medication, and instructed the team calmly. Within minutes, the situation stabilized. Everyone present felt a deep sense of relief, and the other nurses exchanged looks of admiration. "She's something else," whispered one nurse to another. Alyssa didn't hear them. She returned to her rounds, checking each patient carefully. She paused briefly at one bed, speaking softly to a patient who was anxious and frightened. "You're safe here," she said. "We'll take care of you. Just rest." The patient relaxed, the tension easing from their body. Alyssa continued quietly through the ICU, her presence almost soothing in the midst of chaos. As the night wore on, the hospital received a call that more injured patients were on the way. The ICU prepared for incoming trauma, and the staff began coordinating efforts. Alyssa continued to lead by example, calmly moving between rooms, assisting where needed, and offering guidance with quiet authority that others respected instinctively. During a brief break, a group of nurses gathered to discuss her again. "Have you ever seen anyone like her?" One asked. "No," another said. "She doesn't talk about herself, but everything she does is precise. It's like she's been trained for this, maybe even in situations far beyond a regular hospital." "I've never seen someone so calm under pressure," a third nurse added. "It's inspiring." Alyssa returned from a brief pause, carrying supplies for a patient who needed an urgent procedure. She didn't join the conversation, didn't acknowledge the whispers, and didn't seek recognition. She simply continued her work, moving with the same quiet confidence that had defined her every shift. By early morning, the ICU began to settle. Patients were stable, charts were updated, and the staff had a moment to catch their breath. Yet even in the calm, everyone remembered the night's events. Alyssa had handled multiple emergencies, stabilized patients, and maintained an atmosphere of calm control throughout. Her presence had been the anchor in a storm, and the staff couldn't stop talking about her skill and composure. One of the younger nurses finally approached her privately. "I have to ask, how did you learn to stay so calm in situations like this?" Alyssa smiled faintly. "Experience," she said simply, "and focusing on what matters. That's all." The nurse nodded, realizing that there was more to the quiet new nurse than anyone could guess. Alyssa never explained further. She didn't need to. Her actions, her calm demeanor, and her quiet authority told a story far greater than words ever could. The sun began to rise, casting a soft glow over the hospital. The city outside stirred to life, but inside the ICU, the night's events lingered in memory. Alyssa Carter packed her bag, ready to leave, but her presence remained in the minds of everyone who had witnessed her work. She had shown them that calmness, focus, and quiet confidence could make all the difference in the most chaotic of situations. As she walked out of the ICU for the day, the staff watched her leave, filled with respect, curiosity, and a growing sense that this quiet nurse was not ordinary. There was a story behind those calm eyes and steady hands, and though no one yet knew the details, everyone could feel the impact of her presence. The ICU would never be the same, and the staff would remember this night for years to come, always wondering about the quiet strength of Alyssa Carter. The ICU at Riverside General Hospital had been quiet for only a brief moment before chaos returned. It was late evening, and a sudden call from the emergency department signaled that multiple trauma patients were on their way after a large accident on a highway. The staff moved quickly, preparing beds, checking monitors, and ensuring that all equipment was ready. Despite the growing tension, Alyssa Carter remained calm, her movements deliberate and precise. As the first stretcher rolled into the ICU, Alyssa was already at the patient's side, assessing the situation before anyone else could react. The patient was unconscious, pale, and struggling to breathe. Monitors beeped rapidly, and nurses and doctors moved around her, but she seemed to stand in the center of the storm, her focus unwavering. "Pressure is dropping. Prepare fluids," she said quietly, yet her voice carried a calm authority that made everyone listen. A nurse quickly followed her instructions, setting up 4 lines and checking oxygen. Alyssa adjusted the patient's positioning, stabilized the airway, and monitored vitals with careful precision. The chaos around her continued, but she moved methodically, guiding the team without raising her voice or panicking. Other staff watched her closely. They had seen her calmness before, but tonight it seemed even more remarkable. Every action she took was quick but deliberate. Every instruction she gave was clear and precise. Her ability to anticipate what needed to be done next amazed everyone. As the patient's vitals began to stabilize, a loud commotion came from the hospital entrance. A group of uniformed Marines rushed into the ICU hallway, their movements urgent but disciplined. They scanned the room quickly, clearly searching for someone. "Where is she?" one of the Marines called out, voice firm. The staff looked at each other, puzzled. No one understood what was happening. Alyssa, however, immediately recognized the urgency in their movements. She stepped forward calmly, moving to greet them. The Marines approached her and stopped a few feet away. Without hesitation, they saluted. The entire ICU went silent. Nurses froze. Doctors paused mid-action, and even patients seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening. Alyssa, for a moment, simply looked at the Marines, her expression calm but alert. One of the Marines spoke. "We need to speak with the nurse who stabilized our commander. Step aside for a moment," Alyssa nodded quietly, stepping back slightly. The commander, injured but conscious, was brought into view. The Marines explained that Alyssa had been their combat medic during a dangerous overseas mission. She had saved countless lives under extreme conditions, often risking her owl and safety to care for others. The staff listened in awe as the story unfolded. The quiet, reserved nurse they had watched handle emergencies with such calm precision was no ordinary nurse. Her experience in the military had trained her to remain composed under pressure, to assess situations quickly, and to act decisively. All the skill, confidence, and calmness they had witnessed in the ICU now made perfect sense. Alyssa remained modest. She did not boast, did not demand recognition, and did not seek attention. She simply responded with quiet professionalism, guiding the Marines as they ensured their commander received proper care. She checked vitals, adjusted 4 lines, and monitored the patient with the same calm authority that had defined her every action in the ICU. Other nurses whispered among themselves, still amazed by what they were witnessing. "I had no idea," one said. "She's incredible. She's handled every situation tonight like she's been trained for it," another replied. "Now I understand why." The commander, aware of the staff's curiosity, nodded toward Alyssa. "She saved my life back there. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for her quick thinking and steady hands." Alyssa simply nodded and returned to her work. She checked the monitors, made sure medications were administered on time, and ensured that every detail was perfect. Even with the Marines in the room, she remained focused on the patients, quietly leading the team with her calm presence. As the night progressed, the ICU continued to handle multiple emergencies. More patients arrived, each with critical injuries, and each time Alyssa moved through the room with the same steady confidence. She coordinated care, assisted doctors, and supported other nurses, all while maintaining a quiet authority that seemed to calm even the most anxious staff members. The Marines stayed close, clearly impressed by her efficiency and composure. They had seen her in life-or-death situations before, but witnessing her calm in a civilian hospital setting reaffirmed their respect. They watched as she guided the team, stabilized patients, and ensured that every detail was attended to without a single word wasted. During a brief lull, one of the nurses approached Alyssa quietly. "I can't believe what just happened. You're extraordinary." Alyssa shook her head slightly. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly. "Every patient matters and every action counts." The nurse nodded, realizing that words could not capture the full depth of her skill and experience. Alyssa's action spoke louder than anything she could say. The rest of the night passed with the ICU gradually returning to a calmer rhythm. Patients were stabilized, monitors were steady, and the staff had caught their breath. Yet the impact of the Marines' visit lingered in the air. The story of Alyssa Carter, the quiet ICU nurse who had once been a combat medic, spread quickly through the hospital. Staff who had doubted her abilities now looked at her with respect and admiration. Even as the sun began to rise, Alyssa remained focused. She finished updating charts, checked equipment, and ensured that every patient was ready for the next shift. Her calm, steady presence had been a guiding force through one of the busiest nights the ICU had seen in months. As she finally packed her bag to leave, the staff watched silently. No one spoke, for they understood that Alyssa's work was not about recognition. It was about saving lives, supporting her team, and maintaining calm in the face of chaos. Her presence had transformed the ICU that night, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The Marines gave her a final nod of respect before leaving with their commander. Alyssa watched them go quietly, then returned to the nurse station to finish her remaining duties. Even after the extraordinary events of the night, she moved with the same quiet efficiency, never seeking attention or praise. By the time she walked out of the ICU for the day, the staff were still in awe. They had seen firsthand the remarkable skill, calm authority, and quiet strength of Alyssa Carter. They understood that she was more than just a nurse. She was a person who had faced incredible challenges, remained composed under pressure, and dedicated herself to caring for others without seeking recognition. The ICU would never be the same, and her story would be remembered by everyone who had witnessed it. Morning came slowly over Riverside General Hospital, casting a gentle light into the ICU. After a long night filled with emergencies, The staff moved with a quiet sense of relief. Patients were more stable, charts were updated, and the machines continued their steady hum. Yet the memory of what had happened the night before lingered, especially the arrival of Marines and the revelation of Alyssa Carter's past. The staff gathered quietly at the nurse station, sharing their thoughts and impressions from the previous night. Everyone had witnessed something extraordinary, yet no one fully understood the depth of it. Alyssa had managed multiple emergencies with calm precision, and when the Marines arrived, she had handled the situation seamlessly, earning respect without seeking it. "She saved our commander," one nurse whispered. "I mean, she literally saved a life, and here she is, back at work like nothing happened." "She doesn't even talk about it," another replied. "I can't stop thinking about her calmness, her confidence. It's like she's seen everything before." Alyssa walked through the ICU quietly, her expression calm and focused. She checked each patient carefully, adjusted monitors, and ensured medications were given on time. She moved with the same quiet authority she had shown since her first day, but now the staff viewed her in a new light. They no longer questioned her abilities. They respected them deeply. The morning round began, and the doctors noticed how Alyssa coordinated care with ease. She anticipated needs, adjusted treatment plans, and guided the nurses without raising her voice or losing focus. Her calm demeanor had a ripple effect, making everyone around her more efficient and less stressed. During a brief break, one of the senior nurses approached Alyssa. "Can I ask you something?" she said softly. Alyssa looked up, her expression gentle. "Of course," she replied. "Why don't you talk about your past? After last night, after everything, I mean, you could tell people how incredible you are." Alyssa smiled faintly. "I'm not here for recognition," she said. "I'm here to care for patients. That's enough for me." The nurse nodded, understanding that Alyssa's quiet strength was part of what made her so remarkable. Her actions spoke louder than words, and her humility only added to the respect she commanded. Later in the morning, a patient who had been stabilized the night before began to show signs of distress. Other nurses moved quickly, but Alyssa was already at the bedside, assessing the patient and providing clear instructions. She adjusted the 4 lines, monitored vital signs, and ensured the patient was comfortable. Within minutes, the situation stabilized, and the staff once again witnessed her calm authority in action. Throughout the day, more emergencies arose. Patients from minor accidents, complications from previous conditions, and sudden health declines. Each time, Alyssa moved seamlessly through the chaos, handling situations with precision and grace. The staff began to rely on her instinctively, knowing that her guidance and composure would help them manage even the most difficult cases. By afternoon, the ICU had settled into a steady rhythm. Patients were stable, monitors were quiet, and the staff had a moment to reflect on the extraordinary events of the past day. The story of Alyssa's background as a combat medic spread through the hospital, and everyone who had witnessed her skill and calmness felt a deep sense of admiration. One of the nurses approached Alyssa quietly. "I just want to say thank you," she said. "Not just for last night, but for everything you do. You make all of us better at what we do." Alyssa smiled softly. "We're all part of a team," she replied. "Each of us plays a role, and we take care of each other and the patients. That's what matters." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The staff felt inspired, realizing that true leadership was not about titles or recognition, but about action, calmness, and dedication. As the day went on, Alyssa continued her rounds, checking patients, adjusting medications, and offering quiet reassurance to those who were anxious. Her presence brought a sense of calm to the ICU that was almost tangible. Patients felt safer, nurses felt more confident, and doctors trusted her judgment completely. During a quiet moment, the charge nurse approached her. "You've changed the ICU," she said. "I don't know how to describe it, but you've made it better, calmer, more focused." Alyssa nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I just focus on what matters," she said. "Helping people. That's all." Even as the staff marveled at her skill and composure, Alyssa remained modest. She didn't seek praise, didn't boast, and didn't draw attention to herself. Her work spoke for her, and that was enough. As the afternoon turned into evening, the hospital continued its usual rhythm. Patients were stable, charts were updated, and the machines continued their steady hum. Alyssa moved quietly through the ICU, ensuring that everything was in order for the next shift. Her calm authority had left a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed it. The Marines visited the night before it revealed a part of her past. But Alyssa's focus remained on the present. She cared for her patients, guided her team, and maintained an atmosphere of calm and efficiency. Her humility and quiet strength had inspired the staff, and her actions had proven that true courage and skill often worked in silence. By the end of the day, the ICU staff had settled into a routine. Patients were resting, monitors were stable, and the hospital had returned to a sense of normalcy. Yet the memory of Alyssa's calm authority, her precise actions, and the dramatic arrival of the Marines lingered. Everyone who had witnessed her work understood that she was extraordinary, and they would carry the lessons of her composure and dedication with them for a long time. As Alyssa finally packed her bag to leave, the staff watched her quietly. There were no words needed to express their admiration. Her actions, her calm presence, and her dedication had spoken volumes. She had shown them what it meant to be a true professional, a leader in action and a quiet hero. Walking out of the ICU, Alyssa Carter left behind a team inspired by her example, patients stabilized and cared for, and a story that would be remembered. Her quiet strength, humility, and unwavering focus on helping others had transformed the ICU. She had proven that true heroes often work in silence, letting their actions speak for them, and that dedication, calmness, and compassion could leave a lasting impact on everyone around them.